I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles. But I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. And I want my children to live in a Christian nation.
Well, welcome back to The Lone Bulwark. I'm Stephen Wolfe. I have an amazing backlight today. So I have the window open, and it's just kind of nice outside. And if you hear some birds or see some birds, let's see if you focus. You see any birds? No birds. It looks like it's snowing outside. It's really just the effect of the light and all that. But, a very nice day. I wish I was outside, but I have a lot to do in my very messy office. And so I've been doing that all day. Today I'm going to talk part 3 of this video. So part 3. There is some new stuff in here, so hopefully I won't repeat myself. But yeah, so a lot of the news lately, just to kind of give a little, a little preface, I guess, to the rest. A lot of news happening because Trump took office. He was inaugurated. And you have the second term of Trump, final term, I guess we'll find out. But the second term of Trump as president has been fascinating because he has proven to us that actually you can do things. Actually, when you take power and you're in the executive branch, you can do things with the various agencies and departments of the executive branch. And so he's demonstrated that you can do that. And he's revealing years and years of what looks like to be corruption, not only in U.S. aid, but probably also in Department of Education and all the other departments. There's been wasted money. There's been ideological, handing out money to Christianity Today, to Revoice, to that David Friend, what is it? I don't even know what it's called, after party curriculum thing. So clearly there was a lot of money, and then under, bureaucratic power, they would just dispense it. And now Trump is just revealing all of that, and the left is losing their mind. And actually, they're not just losing their mind, they're losing their means of power. Someone pointed out that on Twitter that we've been in a way living in this sort of Truman Show. Right? You can, with all this money, you can dispense money out to various people, various organizations, not just internationally, but nationally, in domestic sphere, and you can tailor the message. You can engineer the message to whatever you want it to be, using the money, propping these people up with legitimacy because they have money, and then they can pay for the fancy the fancy videography and the fancy graphics, and then they get the seat at the table and they get to be interviewed by the press and all these things. All that can just be propped up through a major regime sort of money laundering scheme going through the federal government. And Trump is exposing all that. And we're only like, a week and a half in or something, or a couple weeks into it. Imagine what it's going to be for 4 years of this. And I just hope it continues and continues and continues just to be exposed and destroyed. But what this shows is actually you can do something. Conservatives, this is the thing about conservatives. And this was recorded prior to Trump. This whole video right here was recorded prior to Trump taking office. And it's a sort of like the typical conservative type of defeatism. Typical conservative of, we can't actually do anything. Why do we care? We live in Babylon, blah, blah, blah. It turns out that this power ordained of God, namely civil power, can actually do things. And actually you ought to do things. Once you have an agency that is, one, consented to by the people, and also an agency that's granted you by God for the good of people, then actually it turns out you can do a lot of good for it. Now, not everything Trump has done has good or suggested. He's had some weird proposals recently that I don't fully understand, but, trust the plan, I guess. So far, the plan's working. So far, he's doing the things I voted him for to do. So, most conservatives have not experienced this in their entire lifetime. There was a sort of Reagan revolution in the 80s, and there was a reversal of the tax cuts, so I get all that. But I don't think we've ever seen in anyone's lifetime living today this sort of immediate transformative effect of an administration within the first several weeks. The will to just, obliterate the corruption, the left-wing nonsense, just to do it right off the bat and do it. I don't think we've ever seen that. The only thing that would be analogous to this among conservatives would be George W. Bush, actually. I mean, think of this. There was a 9/11 attack, and then everyone's like, yeah, I guess we should do something about Afghanistan. So we send, like CIA and special forces and a few airborne units in order to do things in Afghanistan in the early days in 2002, late 2001 and 2002. And then all 2002, you keep hearing about Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And it's a epistemic threat to the country. And oh, look at this picture we found of this rusty biological weapon mobile thing. Oh, they're making WMDs. They're an existential threat to the country. And so the entire conservative media apparatus is suddenly like, threat to the country. We don't want to appease Hitler like we did in the 30s. We're just like Neville Chamberlain, the left, and everyone's saying we shouldn't go to war. And there's all this drum for war. And what is this? The appeal to 9/11. Have you forgotten? Have you forgotten? So all this constantly, this propaganda of war with Colin Powell going up there and saying, here's the evidence for they're actually doing WMDs. And so we mass all of our forces, mainly U.S. and some British, in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and other places. And then suddenly March 2003, we invade Iraq under the pretense of weapons of mass destruction. And then a couple of years later, we're making it safe for democracy. And this is what we do as Americans. We liberated Europe from the fascists, and now we're liberating Iraq from, the Islamo-fascists and dictatorship and bringing them liberalism and all this stuff. Anyway, that was similar. Like we were duped into that. And I was duped into that. I was like I was 18 to 20 years old during all that, and I was duped into it. Anyway, he did that. He launched, and that was far more destructive. I mean, all like people from the old neocon years are losing their minds over this, right? You got the Bill Kristols, you got David French, all those warmongers. The guys who orchestrated like wars that killed hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of Americans, not to mention the many more wounded in both body and mind from those wars. These guys are like, oh, government overreach and abuse of power, and how can you do this? Well, you guys did things far worse, and I'm glad to see. I've said for 8-9 years now that Trump is a sort of world historical figure. And he's a great man of history, the most ironic great man of history. I've said that all the way back to 2016. And he's in there to just obliterate stuff that's been created over decades and decades and decades. And he's doing it now. So I realized, just the other day that when I started the podcast with my friend Thomas called Ars Politica, I think the second episode was titled Trump as like world historical figure. And we talked about this, and Trump's doing it. So the first term was like a disappointment. The second term is shaping up not to be a disappointment at all. I'm just hoping that there are some hints within the conservative circles that's like, let's bring back empire, like this new talk of bringing back empire and making America, and then the whole idea of taking over Gaza is bizarre, which I don't think will happen because no one is actually for it, and it's going to take a lot of our diplomatic capital and resources to actually to have Palestinians and relocate into Egypt and other places. So I don't think it's going to work, and if it does work, I think it would be a diplomatic disaster. But anyway, let's hope that doesn't actually happen. But anyway, so that's what's happening now. But it turns out that you can actually do things. Yeah. Anyway, we could get into like executive power and legislative power. I think at this moment, this is the thing. Well, let's get into it. Yeah. I mean, who cares? Did people really want to watch this video? No, they want to hear me blabber on for however long I'm going to blabber on for. There is a legitimate fear of executive power. So I think at the founding period, there were people who liked more executive power, like Alexander Hamilton. But I think the majority of them are actually less comfortable with the executive power. And I think there's a good reason why the executive branch is located in the second article of the Constitution. And that's because the first article is the legislature. And really where things should happen is more in the legislature. Now, over time, the legislature has given up a lot of its power in a way by creating departments for the executive branch. And then in that legislation, granting the executive a lot of power. And so that was, in a way, the legislature giving up its power to decide matters on domestic and foreign policy, giving that up to the president. So as much as we can complain about that, really it's the legislature's fault for granting the executive all this power. But once you find a situation in which there is a sort of fourth branch of government, namely the administrative state, well, what are you going to do? That administrative state as a fourth branch is actually under the executive branch, right? At least on paper, officially, the administrative state is under the executive branch. And so if you're going to topple the executive branch, yeah, you could do it on the legislative side, but it's very weak, and it's actually by its nature, it's a contentious branch, right? Because there's multiple people in each in the House and Senate. And so it's a contentious branch, and now it's actually very closely divided, so it can't get anything done. Also, you have a lot of the Republicans who've been in there for a long time who actually kind of benefit from the administrative state itself. You take like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and those kind of guys. They all benefit from that bureaucratic apparatus. They're tied with it. They are responsible largely for it. And so what do you need? Well, you need the executive branch. You need the exercising of the executive branch to topple the administrative state. And it's principled, like it's not an exercise of tyranny, because literally the administrative state is under the executive branch, right? Even if it's created, not all of them are created by the legislature, but if they are created by the legislature and they're granted the executive power over them, then the executive can use that power to diminish or to change, modify, reduce the size per the statute. And there's other ways, even if the statute says this, the functions are X, Y, and Z, the president still has the power, if he's going to execute those various functions per the statute, he can still do them in ways that check the block, right? Well, I'm saying entirely within the realm of just the law itself, unless it stipulates you have to hire all these people and all these seats have to be filled within a couple weeks or something like that, then you could say, okay, this function is fulfilled by this small department composed of people who are checking the box. I mean, you can do that. And if the legislature wants to change that, or they want to, if they want to make it more robust and do what it has been doing for decades instead of what Trump's turning into, then they can pass legislation that requires the executive by law to do certain things. So anyway, it's all, of course, it's very complicated because the legislation, the statutes and all that. But the fact is, if it's a branch or if it's a department agency of the executive government, it's under the executive, which is the president. And so the president then will have tremendous power over the way in which that department operates. It's hiring, who's hired, and of course the various leadership involved in that. So it's actually good in a way that we have. First of all, we haven't a powerful executive simply because of the nature of what the legislature has done over the past few decades, particularly after World War II. And so for that reason, using the power they've granted to topple that is perfectly legitimate and right and good. And yeah, there is a legitimate fear of a powerful executive, and precisely because we see what the administrative state has become because of the power of the executive, right? I mean, Biden and Obama, a lot of people are attributing the rise of like U.S. aid and all that nonsense that they're distributing domestically and internationally to Obama. And Obama has been credited with creating a type of mass propaganda arm through different ways in what the new right calls the regime. That Obama is largely responsible for putting all that together, and now Trump is actually systematically dismantling that. And because, this is another thing too, because of the connection of the federal government to a lot of corporations, there's a lot of money, say Google, for example, gets a lot of money from the federal government because Google is responsible for creating and managing a lot of the various systems that the Department of Defense uses. Same with Microsoft, same with all these other companies. And so what do you get? You get If the federal government says, well, guess what, Google, we're not going to give you this contract. We're not going to renew this contract if you continue this DEI nonsense. And so just in the news recently, I just saw, guess what? They're actually shutting down their DEI. And other companies are doing this as well because the federal government is saying, nope, sorry, we're not going to renew the contract. We'll go with someone else, right? Or we'll cut you out, or we won't let you meet the president, or we won't let you meet the department of the SecDef, or you're basically cut out. And so they know they have to change the corporate world. This is another thing too, is like we tend to say that like the corporate world dominates our country, but what's being revealed now is actually the federal government, regardless of what it once was, which I still think the government is more powerful than corporations, even under Biden and others. But what this is showing is that there is the power of the government when they're contractually related, when there's money going from the government to these corporations. What this reveals is that actually government has tremendous power over all these companies. All right, so yeah, a lot of crazy things happening. So with that long 15-minute beginning, I think what I'll do now is just transition to the video. I don't think I can say anything else right now, but exciting stuff happening. Exciting stuff happening right now, and my dog is barking behind me. That's just what happened. That's just what happens. That when Amazon truck comes by, guess what? They're getting barked at, and that's just how it is.
The Nathaniel Greene Society is a Protestant organization dedicated to serving the state of North Carolina and the United States broadly. Their mission statement is, "With thanks and praise to God Almighty, be it known that the Nathaniel Greene Society is established for the purpose of mentoring men in the esteemed cultural and folk traditions of America, with a particular reverence for the heritage of the great state of North Carolina. Our mission is to engage men actively in the local community, churches, and various civic organizations, fostering a robust sense of community and civic duty. If you are a conservative Christian man with a desire to employ your time, resources, and unique skills for the sake of your state and nation, then reach out for a membership application. You can contact them at Nathaniel Greene Society at protonmail.com. That's Nathaniel Greene Society at protonmail.com. You can also send a direct message to their official social media account. You can find the link and additional information about the society at nathanielgreenesociety.org.
But let's see. Hopefully I can hear this when I play it. Dogs are very excited, but let's play this.
I was thinking a lot about this. Our witness in the midst of all this. So, one of the things after that discussion was said, well, you guys sit in California. California is an enigma, right? We do have multicultural to the extreme in California. Like, I'm used to that. I grew up in that. You're absolutely right. What they see as an evil, I see as an opportunity,
right?
Right? This is how we look at life. God brought the nation.
I think we covered this last time, so, I apologize, but we'll just keep going. Just keep going through this.
To our doorstep. So you can say, that's not in this whole earthly good thing, I think is taken way too far, like natural goods. I
have many friends in the South. My wife's from Tennessee. Many people there you have rampant cultural Christianity.
Yeah.
So in one sense, it's easier for us in California where you don't have cultural Christianity.
No.
It's easier to be
Very
light.
black and white.
Oh yeah. It's easier to be light in the midst of darkness than to be light in a fake light.
Right.
Because that's where they are in many places.
So is that actually true, though? I mean, is that actually true? I mean, take like deepest, darkest, like North Korea. Can the gospel flourish there? So I don't think it's actually true that the darker it is, and they didn't exactly say this, but I don't think the darker it is, the more light you can shine, because the darkness in certain places, I'm not saying the whole world, of course, but in certain places is pretty much smothered and put out. And so anyway, now also, but just given their claims, what they say themselves there, right? Between California and like a place of cultural Christianity, it's easier to be light. Well, I mean, when you frame it that way, I guess it's easier to shine a light in a way in darkness in certain places. I don't know if that's actually happening in California. is this, it sounds actually kind of like an empirical question in a way. In other words, like, do you actually experience conversion happening in California? Are we seeing mass conversions of like the left-wing degenerates into Christianity because of your light? I know some people are. I'm just saying, is that like that's the claim itself is actually it can be tested in the real world. Okay, it sounds great. The light shines in the dark, but actually, if you test it, is it actually true? And I would submit that it's actually not true. But I will say though that in the South, which I've lived for, let's say now, nearly about 15 years of my life. So 20 years California, like them. I was Northern, not Southern. And then some years in the Army when I was all over the place. And then, yeah, so I guess it's been about 15, 16 years in the South. The benefit of the South in a lot of places in the South is that, yes, there's cultural Christianity, meaning that people, or nominal Christianity, people think that they're a Christian. But the thing about that is when you talk to people, they say, I'm a Christian or I'm born again. And then you say, do you go to church? No. Okay. Well, shouldn't you go to church? You know, so it actually gives you, instead of you getting past like the trans stuff and the gay stuff and saying like, oh, if you're a Christian, then you have to be right wing and you have to deal with that argument and all that, which it's actually true though. I mean, I know they think it's anachronistic, but it's actually true that in today's left-right spectrum, if you're a Christian and affirm moral orthodoxy, you know, you're on the right. I don't know what to, excuse me. I don't know what else to tell you. So anyway, you don't have to get past that. If you have a Christian person who's Southern, or excuse me, a conservative Southerner who thinks he's a Christian but he's not, you actually have, they already assent to a lot of the doctrines, and you could say, hey, I'm calling you to faithful. I'm calling you, you're proclaiming Christ in your words now, and yet you ought to actually put faith in him and do the things that he calls you to do, which is, go to church, become members of a church, and all these things, right? So you actually, I mean, I wonder really, it sounds nice to talk about light and darkness, but is that actually true? Is it actually true in experience? Whereas in the South, the problem is that people are sort of apathetic, but you have common ground of common assents, meaning they assent to certain things. You have a common heritage, meaning you can say, hey, your grandfather went to church, your grandmother went to church, your grandmother probably talked to you about the gospel. And what did she do? Well, she faithfully went to church. Maybe you should as well, or however you present that to them. So I don't agree with this common notion that because you have nominal Christianity, it's better to just be outwardly atheist. I mean, this is what Russell Moore was saying in like 2014 in a blog post where he said he wants the destruction of cultural Christianity because then you have this clear distinction between who's in and who's out, so then you can do evangelism. Actually, what that does is create hostility to the gospel. It creates hostility. It makes you embattled. And you know what it means? I know I'm going on and on about this, but I probably would have gotten to this later. But what this means is that my kids are becoming this certain age where now they're receiving questions from neighbor kids that challenge their faith. All right, so I have a 12-year-old, there's a neighbor kid, and that neighbor kid is now asking questions, and we're probably going to do something where we limit time together and all that because of this. But nevertheless, it's raised a question. But I mean, this is just, it's just a matter of time. It doesn't matter if there's a neighbor kid or what it is, that they will hear these arguments because there's hostility to the faith. And now my 12-year-old, you have to talk her through these things, and I'm buying her these books so that she can read these books. Now, it's good that she can defend her faith. It's good that she would know these arguments and how to do apologetics. But wouldn't you, as a father, prefer that your child would be in an environment in which your faith is not, there's no hostility to that faith? That you can grow up in a way just believing the gospel and be able to, in an environment in which that promotes it, with the neighbor kids, people around you, even neighbors that kids that they perhaps don't go to church, but they have some history of it where they kind of think that they're Christians. Anyway, I just we're subjecting, like we in a way invite, like we think that we, as like I've said before, Presbyterians kind of have it all together. We tend to think that we have it all together. We have our books, we have our seminary professors, we have the resources, we have the proper worship and all that. And we just don't think that by not caring about the society itself, we're actually turning it hostile on us. And it means that everyone else is subjected to the hostility. And even if your kids, like I know how to answer these questions for my kids. I know which resources to give them. I know all that. But the benefit of a cultural Christianity, that is a culture that sees Christianity as normal, as the norm, and something that's not Christianity is a sort of abnormality or something abnormal to it, or at least a sort of second-class status. When you're in that sort of environment, everyone, not just your kids, but even your neighbor that might be a nominal Christian is not subjected to the hostility. That is moral heterodoxy and theological heresy. It just seems that if you're going to love your neighbor, cultural Christianity is actually a way of loving your neighbor. I mean, of course, you can't save someone merely by a cultural norm. I've said this over and over. I say in the book many times, being born into a Christian nation does not make you a Christian. But it does create conditions in which Christianity can be promoted and flourish. Okay, so anyway, let's continue on with this. And
many places in the South where, oh yeah, my daddy was a preacher. Mm-hmm. I went to church as a kid. Of course, I'm living with my girlfriend and I have 14 addictions and I've never been to church in 20 years, but I'm a Christian. I prayed the sinner's prayer. I was baptized. I'm a Christian. That's the kind of cultural context you have to deal with.
But isn't that a good context? I know it's like relatively evil and it's relatively good. I mean, or it's not good, obviously, for someone to claim the name of Christ and yet not never go to church, right? So that would be indication the person's not actually saved in their heart. Yet, when you encounter that guy, you can say, look, you claim to be saved, you were baptized, you proclaim Christ in public in front of a church, you have a heritage of faith, then what are you doing? In a way, you can call that person to faithfulness. And with that, of course, you're calling them to faith because they don't have true faith. But I'm saying that you've made those proclamations both verbally and in like external action. Now you call that person to faithfulness. I don't understand why encountering some left-wing wacko is preferable than encountering that guy. Wouldn't it be more preferable to encounter this baptized guy who doesn't go to church? I don't understand it. I just don't get why that would be preferable. So anyway, but the other thing too is if you live in cultural Christianity, like a true cultural Christianity, I don't mean like, there are somewhere like it's just so deadened that it actually doesn't have any force. I'm talking about the sort of cultural Christianity that is a little more robust, that would make that guy living with his girlfriend actually a bad thing. So, so the point is that a robust cultural Christianity, of course, cannot save you, but it would suppress and it would denigrate that sort of situation that you live with your girlfriend. So it actually would produce societal good. It would give you a ground to then, in a way, socially censor that sort of behavior. It gives you a means to correct behavior because everyone's claiming to be Christian, and so you call them to proper Christian behavior. Of course, with that, the priority would be calling them to faithfulness to Christ. But then at the same time, there's that social good of looking down upon bad behavior as that. So I don't know. So it both encourages social good and it gives you a common ground of things that you assent to, from which you could call that guy to faithfulness and true faith in Christ.
In many parts of the South. So even though, yeah, okay, outwardly, it's not quite as ungodly as California is in a real visible way, but internally, it's no more Christian in many ways because you're dealing with cultural Christianity. And I don't want that either. Mm-hmm. That's not better. Yeah, okay, you might have more room to operate as Christians in those contexts, but as long as we aren't locked in jail, as long as we have the freedom to proclaim the gospel every Lord's Day from our churches, I'll take our context over that. Because again, it's much easier to preach the gospel in total darkness, where we can confront people with the truth of Scripture, and it is a jarring thing, because the cultural Christianity is not there to deaden the radical nature of that message.
No. All right, so I don't need to repeat myself. I already kind of challenged all of that. It's strange, though, that he does acknowledge that there are some goods associated with all that. But then an easier time of light in the darkness. I don't see that. And this is the argument, again, from experience. Not my personal experience. By experience, I mean knowledge of the world and how it has played out over millennia. The gospel has been smothered in areas. That's true. It's become so dark that the light cannot ordinarily penetrate. Now, I'm not saying God couldn't. I'm just saying that as things have worked out, various places have been smothered of the light of the gospel. So I don't think that's all accurate.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we've mentioned cosplay before, but that's an important concept in the midst of all this. But I think mission is so important here. I want to reiterate, I've looked at where God has us as opportunity. I don't sort of look at and say, and there's almost this like pitting against the kingdom of God, which, and this is another point for exile theology. The kingdom of God represents it in the new heavens and the earth as multicultural. So I said, that's kind of the heavenly good. And so, the immediate response is that you're downplaying the significance of who you and your people are. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, we all are made a certain way.
Who are your people?
Yeah, but see, this is what I'm talking about. Who are the people? Who is the family the Lord has put together? Those are my people. When I said the gospel lifts us to a higher plane, that's absolutely true. Like I'm taught to think a different way as a Christian than the natural man thinks.
Right.
All right. So this gets into, I've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating that what's weird though is that these guys are two kingdoms guys, right? They're modern two kingdom folks. So they believe in the two kingdoms. I also believe in two kingdom theology. But my two kingdom theology is more of a distinguishing the two kingdoms, and theirs is far more of a type of separation. And this is what I mean. My distinction means that I could say that there are Christian citizens, Christian magistrates, Christian civil rulers, Christian laws, Christian state, Christian nation. But their separationism, which is not historical at all, it's historical if you want to go back 20 years, 20, 30 years, it's separationism. What their conception of all those things I just said is a conjunction, meaning Christian and civil ruler, or Christian and ruler, Christian and nation, Christian and state. All right. That's how, so they separate those like that, such that you cannot use Christian as an adjective. You can say Christian man. I guess you can say Christian seminary. You can say Christian school, Christian charity. But you can't say Christian, maybe you can say Christian family. I don't know. You can't say Christian state, can't say Christian nation. Anyway, they want to separate those things. But this is, I said this on Twitter the other day. What I've come to realize that when you separate them, you then can't make the adjective noun, Christian nation. And so the Christian has to operate as one or the other. And he just kind of highlighted that right there. You operate as there's a family of God, and you don't think like the natural man, even though these guys affirm natural law, right? But because they're separating them, you can't be a Christian citizen. You can be a Christian in a civil society. That's the best way I can think right now to put it. And so you can't reconcile the two. I mean, they might think they can reconcile it, but the way they talk about it means that you can't really reconcile. You've got the family of God, your people, and that jars with your national people. There's no reconciling of that. Whereas I've always said that yes, there is a church in which there is a people of God, and it is a sort of family, and yet that's perfectly reconcilable with the idea of having your own earthly nation, right? So, and I wrote an article for American Reformer called "Nation" something, I don't know. You can look at it there. That's where I reconcile that. But these guys can't do it. So they have to jump between one or the other. And because the things of grace are higher than the things of nature, well, that means that when you're operating in the natural realm, you're really just operating according to grace in the natural realm. So you can't actually reconcile both of them. And we'll proceed, as we proceed in this video, you see exactly how this kind of plays out. They downplay the idea that you can have an earthly people and that actually matters. Okay, so when I was on Chris Gordon's show, I was arguing for that there's heavenly and earthly good, and actually to be a complete human being as created by God, it's good to have a people. It's good to have a people in which you share language, cultural customs, common heritage, a common history, a common connection to historical events and people, from which inspires you to great acts now for the future. So connection to the dead, living, and unborn. That's all good for you. In fact, it's a necessary good for you to be a complete human. And it's perfectly reconcilable with the idea of having an international sort of visible Catholic church in which it's composed of different peoples. This is why I say that you can have in the world several different Christian nations. They could all be Christian and all be totally different and all acknowledge each other's difference and respect each other's difference, and each seek to secure and promote their distinctives without any animosity or any motivation to destroy or undermine or homogenize. You can do that. It's perfectly reconcilable to say that we are a sort of ecclesial family, and yet at the same time, in this world, you need to be a complete human being, have a distinct cultural people way of life that's worth preserving. And actually your moral duty is to recognize other people's distinctive way of life and to respect that and to respect their promotion of it. So let's keep going.
Does that downplay culture? Does that downplay? No, we all take our own cultures right now in this side of heaven into the kingdom of God. Like I am a person made a certain way. Somebody else has made it, but we become a united family together where distinctions in terms of salvation, the Galatians thing I get abused, Galatians 3:28. But in terms of salvation, those distinctions are ripped away.
Yeah.
So I don't understand the argument here. Yeah, I mean, I would agree the distinctions in terms of salvation in the kingdom of God, spiritual kingdom of God, there's neither Greek nor Jew, male or female, slave, free man, like all that stuff is irrelevant to your standing within the kingdom of God. But these guys are two kingdom guys. That's why this is very confusing and yet makes sense when you understand how they separate the two kingdoms and can't reconcile them. So, yeah, I don't understand why that argument works unless you understand what I said earlier.
And the idea of my people, what does that even mean? Mm-hmm. What is an American externally? It's not a certain ethnic background. Maybe originally people from England, the British Isles, not even the British Isles, just Britain itself, at the founding. But then very soon you have German immigrants, other Northern European immigrants. You've got the French all over in Louisiana. And then when they become part of the United States, they are not British.
Right.
They're not descendants of British. Mm-hmm. So who is American? Not long after that, in the middle of the 19th century, late 19th century, You've got a flood of Irish and Italians.
Yeah, right. Catholics.
Right? Are they not American?
Right.
Who are my people in the temporal kingdom in the horizontal sense?
All right, let me say that first of all, the only people in the history of the world and in our world today who cannot immediately answer that question, who are my people, are whites. I'm not saying because they'd be called racist, but because they cannot psychologically bring themselves to say who their people are. Everyone else can do it. You'll ask a Black American. You ask someone who's Chinese. You ask someone who's, if someone who's Hispanic. Now, many of those people might say, actually, it is that they are American or they are Mexican or whatever. Whatever they respond, they don't have any problem saying it. They don't have any problem saying who their people are. But the question itself, only whites get hung up on that question. Okay, so the question for here, who are my people in the American context? That is a challenging question simply because of the history of America, but it's not as challenging as I think these guys think. So first of all, I think there was a unique an Anglo-American ethnicity that was formed around the founding period, subsequent to its events into the early 19th century. Of course, it was derived from mainly British culture and the political tradition, and yet there was a distinct Americanness, and British people who traveled to America certainly experienced that. You could read someone like Charles Dickens' sort of tirade against Americans, that there is a distinct people. Of course, they speak English. They have a lot of similar English customs and all that, and literary tradition and all that. But at the same time, that they are a distinct people, and it was distinctly Anglo-Protestant. So the idea of that America in its core is an Anglo-Protestant country, that's just common. It's a common view among social scientists, political theorists. Samuel Huntington says it. Even Paul Miller, who's a critic of Christian nationalism, basically says we are an Anglo-Protestant country. He just has a different view of how that plays out, internationally. But everyone kind of acknowledges that our political tradition, our customs, way of life, is rooted at its core in a type of Anglo-Protestantism that developed into that became a sort of an Americanized version of it. Now you get this influx of immigrants, and the expectation in the 19th century was largely that they would assimilate. That's why many of them changed their last name, for example. Many of those who did not assimilate and still have not assimilated went to major cities, took over Boston, took over New York, and they still are a sort of Americanish version of Italian or whatever. So they've only, I think they've probably only partially assimilated, but whatever. But the point is that there has been a core, so that is basically the American idea. But the thing is, when we talk about ethnicity, and of course I've got beat up by this all the time, I don't think ethnicity is purely a matter of blood. Okay, I don't think it purely is. I think you could look at the history of Israel, and people who are outsiders come in, they adopt the way of life of those people, and they're integrated into those people such that their ancestry is commingled within it, and they essentially become Hebrew Israelite. Despite that ancestral origins, I think that's the same thing with America. That you can have people who are not even have a drop of English blood, and yet they can be integrated, assimilated into America, and become one of us in the same way. It happens through intermarriage. It happens through participation in the national events, meaning like wars and other things. And you can actually become Anglo-Protestant or an American Anglo-Protestant through time, through those various processes. That, of course, happened with the Germans, happened with most of the Irish, and particularly the early Germans, the Midwestern Germans, of course, and many of the Irish as well, particularly if they moved out of the bigger cities. And same with the Italians if they moved out of the bigger cities. So there has been an assimilation. There has been a core people. This has been identified. It was identified in the 19th century. The early 20th century had an emphasis on Anglo-Saxonism. And then we had 1924 or 25, Immigration Act, which cut off immigration. And the 1965 opened the floodgates of immigration. We have what we have today. But if we want to maintain what America has been, as we understand it historically, if the more we move away from an Anglo-Protestant tradition and culture, the more we're going to move away from America itself. So, who are my people? I'll answer this straight. It's easy to say who are not your people who live here. If people don't speak English, not my people. If they go to a soccer match and Mexico's on one side and America's on the other and they wave the Mexican flag, not my people. If they're out in the streets right now waving the Mexican flag, not my people. If they're over here and they care more about some ethnic strife in a different country and they're waving their country's flag, not my people. Okay. I will say though, and actually I was on the way to meet Chris Gordon and I took an Uber. I took an Uber ride there. And the guy that drove me, he had an accent. I get in the car and he says, "Oh, your name's Steven." And he asked me this question. First thing he said, "Do you know what your name means in the Bible?" That's it. I've been in many Uber drives, and a lot of times we don't say anything to each other, but he said, "Do you know what your name means in the Bible?" And I was like, "I actually do." I was like, "It means like crowned one, crown." And so we got into a conversation. And this guy had been in the United States for about 15 years, 20 years, something like that. And he's from Egypt. And we get to talking, and it turns out this guy was an evangelical in Egypt. So he wasn't a Coptic. He wasn't even Presbyterian. There's some Presbyterians in Egypt. He was an evangelical. And he was a medical doctor in Egypt. And I'm talking to this guy, and he's like, "I love America, this and that." And he told me which church he goes to, which is some evangelical church. He's Calvinist. And I was like, man. And so the last thing I said to the guy when I walked out the door was, "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here." And it was one of those things where it was ironic because I'm going to a discussion where I know I'm going to get all these, like, they say you're racist. They say you're ethno-nationalist. They say you're this and that. And I wasn't trying to make myself, I'll cover myself by doing this now so I know in my heart of hearts I'm not a racist. No, I genuinely meant it. Like, that's what a nation should do. A Christian nation should look at this guy and say, theologically, you're great. You want to move to this country not simply because of economic benefit. He didn't move here for economic benefit because he was denied a medical license when he got to the United States. So he has not been able to practice medicine, even though he practiced medicine in Egypt for like 40 years. And so the best he could do is be an Uber driver, but he could be a doctor in Egypt. So he didn't come here to work the system to make more money. Like, that's the sort of people you want. Now, I wouldn't want 20 million of that guy because that would change things a bit. But that's what I'm talking about in terms of you can bring people in. They can assimilate into it because they have the sort of prerequisites that lend that sort of assimilation into something. What does it mean to assimilate? To say there's nothing, a core cultural, ethnic, historical, whatever of the United States, then what are you being assimilated into? Oh, just the ideas, man. No. Ideas don't cut it.
Are you looking for a natural way to boost your family's health? Discover the benefit of elderberry while supporting a Christian family-owned business at Abby's Elderberry. They produce high-quality products by crafting each one without the use of artificial ingredients or preservatives. Just pure, delicious elderberry goodness. Whether you're looking for syrups, a variety of loose leaf blends, or even a DIY kit complete with everything you need to make your own syrup, owners Brad and Starla Walker have it for you at Abby's Elderberry. Visit them at abbieselderberry.com. That's abbieselderberry.com. Visit them today to experience all the goodness of elderberry without the junk. And for listeners of the Lone Bulwark, use promo code BULWARK at checkout to save 15% off your total order. My family has been using elderberry for immune support for many years. The products at Abby's Elderberry taste great, and my entire family loves them.
If you're going to say, as an American, these are my people, America should be for Americans. All right, well, who is that ethnically? And then you have Eastern Europeans coming, late 19th, early 20th century. Polish. There were, at one time, I'm from Chicago, there were more Polish people in Chicago than there were in Warsaw. Mm-hmm. Are they not American? They're Catholic.
Yeah, yeah.
So if we're going to purify the land, and if it's blood and soil, well, whose blood?
Well, that's exactly right. Like, a lot of it's nostalgia. You know, you might say, well, my grandpa, had my great grandfather had land in South Dakota, and he farmed that land, and that, but it wasn't always his land. So who's, and I use the example of, my wife in the last one, but, and I didn't think there was a good answer to this, but, my father-in-law's, Spanish, my mother-in-law's Swedish, my wife's, kind of a mix of all that. Where's her homeland?
Who are her people?
Who are her people? And see, this is why is it a frustration for people to say, and I made the point too, like people in place, that the church is the people.
All right. Before we get back into that nonsense, why does blood matter? I explained all this stuff to him in the video, by the way, but why does blood and why does soil matter? I know it's like you can't say that because other people, the baddies used it, but isn't it just the case? Now, this is why blood actually matters. It's not because it's solely determinative of who your people are. I've denied that over and over and over. But it's because you have a natural concern and love for people of your blood. That, or other words, of your family line. Let me say that. Of your kin. Kin meaning the people who are in your identifiable family network, both living and going back through time. Now, why does all that matter? Well, you have a natural concern and affection for those people. And what did those people do if they've been in a certain place for generations? They worked the land. They worked. They built up wealth, perhaps. They bought land. They worked that land. They went to war for the country. They had political activity, social activity, institutional activity. They had friends. They had partnerships. Here, there, like in this place. How can you not then love also that place? How can you not also feel some responsibility for that place? That this is the place, what you've been handed in life, even if some things you've been handed to were bad, the good that you've been handed is a gift from those people. And more than that, the place itself, even after someone dies, it can still communicate a type of presence of those people. There's aristocrats used to plant trees on their property, not so that they would see them themselves, reach their full maturity, but that their great-grandchildren would reach it because they had a projection into the future. And those trees, whether it's for shade or for beauty or for lumber, for milling, for forestry, whatever it's for, it's a gift for those people. And so those great-grandchildren, after, great-grandfather dies, can look to those trees and say, those are planted by my grandfather, and there they are. And if that doesn't bring any sentiment or affection or responsibility or some sort of familial piety to you, then I think you have a cold heart. But that's what I'm talking about. And that's what a nation is. A nation is not just a collection of people whose homeland is somewhere else, of people whose have no historical connection to the place. It's a people who can identify with that place precisely because their loved ones lived and died there. And when you bring people into this country, you're not just assimilating them into the ideas, you're assimilating into that connection of people in place. You're assimilating them into a type of proper veneration of the heroes of that place, so that they're inspired by the people you're inspired by. That's what assimilation is. That's what people in place is. It's not a pure, like, abstract blood thing, but blood matters. Of course it matters. Even if, there's my dog barking. Even, there's my dog disrupting everything. But you know what? You know what's happening right now? Is I built a deck outside, and my dog's run around chasing my kid on the deck that I built. I built that thing almost by myself from scratch. Own design, everything. Poured the piers, all that stuff. And now my kid's playing on it. Now I know that's only like a few months old or whatever, but it's not a big deal. But this is kind of what I'm talking about, is that place that I've made, that it's a pretty sizable deck, is now being enjoyed by my loved ones, my kids, and that stupid dog that barks all the time. Just take that, but take that generationally, where now you can recognize that you live in a place, you're going into the same store, you know, whatever it is. I can keep going on and on, but that all should matter. And I guess now we're getting into more of the two kingdom confusion.
People in place. We have a soil. This is what I'm getting back to. The heavenly land is the soil we are taught to come out from this world and seek. There may be natural goods. There may be things in this life that we want to preserve for the good of society. I don't think anyone argues that.
Sure.
But you notice what happened there. This is what happens with like the two kingdom guys. I know I've said this so many times, but I got to say it. They identify that there's these two things. There's heavenly, earthly. And then they want to shift, the soil, the heavenly soil is all that matters. But, I'll say really quickly and kind of monotonishly that, yes, we should have earthly this and that. That's preserve that. No one's arguing with that. Like, is that what we just argued against for, the whole time? It's like they can't figure out a way to reconcile these two things.
When there are things that are harmful to people, right?
Right.
But, when I took in college, I remember studying, the missions. And I remember studying what happened on the mission front to the natives. Well, whose land was it?
It's not pretty.
It's not pretty, So anyways, these are all things to think about.
Our blood and soil is the body of Christ gathered together for worship on the Lord's day.
Right.
That's the only blood and soil I care about.
That's right.
Yeah, I like being American. If this country was conquered tomorrow, yeah, I'd be sad, but I wouldn't lose all hope.
Right.
I could easily live in another country. I lived for 5 years in England, in another country.
So again, there is this thing again, the only blood that matters is the family on for the Christian. So again, emphasizing that the only one that matters. Well, actually, I love being American. Well, what is it? I mean, it's you have these tensions because of your separation, but you can't reconcile them. And you like being American, but if it fails, I'd be sad. Well, you know what? I don't understand. This is like, if America failed tomorrow, everyone that you hold dear would suffer. So I don't understand this. Like, I don't care what happens. Do we think that it's like even your non-Christian neighbor would suffer, I guess, unless they're the ones who are overthrowing. I don't get that. Like, he says, like, hey, it's not your original hope, your ultimate hope. Well, no one's arguing for that. Like, I don't know who's arguing that your ultimate hope is going to be found in a Christian America. I don't know. So it was like a shifting, and then like, oh, it's actually not your ultimate hope. It's just all this like rhetorical stuff going on because they can't actually reconcile the various ideas that they have.
Was thinking about settling there permanently. So to me, it's such a shallow approach for a Christian to place such an emphasis on these insignificant markers. Now, people might say, "Oh, it's my genealogical family." To call that insignificant is insulting. All right, it's not. I'm not trying to be insulting, and it's not to say there isn't any significance in your family history, but to fight for an ethnic identity or a particular plot of real estate, to me, just has no resonance compared to what we have. If that's all you have, if you're not a Christian, all you have is this world. All right, I can understand. If this is your ultimate hope, okay, that makes sense. But if your ultimate hope is in heaven, if you're looking forward to the age to come, if your true citizenship is in heaven, then who cares?
Right.
This world is passing away.
See,
it's all going to be burned up.
See, there you go. This world will be passing away.
It's all going to be burned up.
All going to be burned up. All going to be burned up. So it's wild. All right, that dog's barking too much, so I close that up. But yeah, so it's all going to burn up. It's all going to burn up. Who cares? Who cares? So you don't care about the nation, but what do you care about your family? I mean, the family is a natural thing. Families can fail. So then, the only thing that matters is the family of God, not your own family. Who cares? It doesn't matter to him. What's interesting is like this matters to everyone else in the world, including Christians. But it doesn't matter to particularly white Americans. It'll just burn up. A lot of things will burn up. Now, instead of saying pursuing, defending your nation, stand up and saying defend your 401k or defend your Christian school that's adjacent to your church or defend your own life, defend the lives of your family. Are those all insignificant because they'll burn up? In the end, this body's perishing. Its various failures and problems represent the corruption and fallenness of the world, so it doesn't matter. I don't understand the principle. I think what's happening in the background is they have adopted a modern mindset that these things don't matter, and so they're just asserting that it doesn't matter. The other things do actually matter, apparently. A lot of other things do actually matter. But it's just according to what essentially the world is telling us should matter and should not matter.
It's this earth purified or a completely new earth. This earth is gone.
Yeah.
Why would we place such a high emphasis on it?
If you ever look at these sort of genealogical tests, the tests they're due now to look at your genes and look at who you are, it's surprising what you find out about your mix.
Yeah.
Nobody's 100%.
Most people are mud.
Nobody's 100% anything.
Yeah.
That was said in the last podcast. Like, if my grandpa's 100%, I'm like, sorry, that's done.
Italians are not 100% Italian.
But that misses the point that I've said before. And what I said is that actually an ethnicity is not purely a matter of blood, but it can be a people who have a common history, common way of life, historical connection, a sort of genealogical connection to people in place. And your ancestry can be very different than the ancestry of someone else who you also call your people. Okay, so anyway, it's a false. I mean, actually, in a way, they're proving my point. Like we would say Italians are Italians, and yet if you look at the Italian makeup in places like northern Italy, you'll see actually there's a mix of French and some German and some other things within these northern Italians, and yet they are northern Italian. I mean, I know they're different than southern Italians in certain ways, but anyway, we would all say that they are Italian because culturally they are Italian, right? So that's actually my point. An American is someone who has, in a way, born into or been naturalized into a way of life, usually taking generations in a place with the same people, identifying with like I said, the venerated heroes and all that. And it's very similar to actually what he means by Italian. Not exactly similar, but similar enough.
That's the thing. Where are you going back to?
I know.
The British. Oh, well, I'm 100% English. Are you? Well, then you're Saxon and you're Pict and you're all these other. You got the Anglo. There's. It's all mixed. Italians.
Again, exactly proving my point.
And this is, I don't know. Maybe the whole like blood and soil thing is part of the fact of not, perhaps this I guess not traveling much, because if you go around the world, these nations are not unified in every way. I was just in Italy a few weeks ago. There's a massive difference between Italians in the north in Milan and Italians in Sicily. If you were to do the 23andMe with them, good night. Sicily was conquered 1,000 times over the centuries. You've had Arab control, you've had Greek control. I mean, it's not Italian, purely Italian.
Yeah.
That's absurd.
Yeah, these are utopian dreams. These are utopian dreams.
Yeah.
And
they're chasing
it's
a myth.
nostalgia.
No, but even when we talk about purely Italian, if you look at their own history, Italian is a combination of the various tribes and peoples of Italy going back to the ancient world. So everyone recognizes that every people group that exists now that we identify with Italian or German or French or English or Scottish or Irish, all those have, you could say, derivative ancestry that have been undergone what you call a type of ethnogenesis. That is, everything is in a way derivative and yet is independent in a way from their derivation. So Irish, even though they have some mix of some Scottish and I think some Viking and Celt and stuff, they yet are still one people, namely the Irish, because of an ethnogenesis that is independent in itself from its derivation because it's undergone ethnogenesis. So it's the same thing with all these things. So what they're saying is actually supporting what my own argument, right? I think they want to say, though, and this is the move that actually left-wing people do, what they say is that, it's derived from these different people groups and therefore it's not actually a thing. It's not a real thing because it's derivative. But that's just stupid. It's foolish. It's wrong. Everyone's recognized ethnogenesis. You even go back to the Aeneid, right? So at the end of the Aeneid, you have Aeneas. Of course, he's near the end. And one of the prophecies from Juno tells Jupiter, and she says, "Okay, fine. I'll stop trying to kill Aeneas and I'll stop trying to kill the Trojans." Okay. So Aeneas is held up as a sort of founder. He didn't found Rome itself, but he's a major founder of Rome. Right. To him was foretold the growth of the Roman Empire, Caesar Augustus, and all that. But Juno says to Jupiter, "Okay, fine. I'll stop trying to kill him. But you know what? The Trojans themselves, as a people, are going to vanish. How are they going to vanish? They're going to intermingle with the Latins. And so Rome will not be called Troy or Troy 2.0 or New Troy. It'll be called Rome. It'll be after the Romans. The Trojans will learn the Roman language, the Latin language. So the Trojans cease to exist, but do they? What happens is there's an ethnogenesis, namely you have the early Romans. But anyway, there's an ethnogenesis that happens, and so everything in the end, every group of people you find is a complex derivation of multiple ancestry, and yet we still say they are a people. But the left wants to use that to say, actually, it's not a thing, which is foolish and silly.
Nostalgia, it's something that, and it's distracting us from our mission. But I think it's a good point. Like, when people sometimes quote, Jesus said the meek shall inherit the earth. If you read Calvin on that, he's talking about, we do not doubt that he's talking about the new heavens and the new earth. Like, but so much of this is so earth. I just saw it yesterday. I was reading an article on Ted Turner. The guy's bought 2 million acres of land in the U.S. He's the largest landowner, I think, in one of the.
I heard it one time. If you could travel on his land from Montana to Mexico,
it's just incredible what he's preserved. But it was fascinating because he says in the middle of the interview, he's dying right now.
Yeah.
He has some kind of degenerative disease and he's slowly dying. He can't remember, his mind's given out. And he says, "I just believed when I did this that I could create heaven on earth."
Wow.
And I was like, and he doesn't believe in God.
No.
So, and I thought, this is the heart of the issue. Like when Jesus said, "Don't store up your treasures where moths and rusts destroy. Set your mind on heavenly things, heavenly treasures. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be." There's far too much earthly treasuring going on right now.
We have it too good, man. It's because we have the ability.
In the other videos I talk about this. Of course, it's disheartening because I explain to Chris over and over and over my position and how it's distinguished from that. I don't want to create heaven on earth. I want earth to be oriented to heaven. So I won't repeat myself. But again, it's disheartening that these same lines can be repeated over and over and over without saying, oh, I'm actually referring to Doug Wilson, which I don't think that would work either, but it certainly doesn't work against me. So it's very, it's annoying. Anyway, I think we'll end it there. I'm getting kind of annoyed. So anyway, we've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes. So yeah, it's frustrating. A Christian people, a Christian nation, what makes a nation Christian is that nation does Christian things. It worships God on Sunday. It acknowledges itself as a Christian nation. It has customs that are Christian. So various festivals, not only distinctively Christian events, but that even their sort of earthly, a harvest festival is in a way adorned by the things of Christ. So you'd have maybe a prayer or something like that in the middle of that. And so that would be a Christian harvest festival, even though it's not like, so that's what a Christian nation is. And yet the nation as such is still its distinct thing. It'll have its own language, its own literary tradition, its own dances, its own heroes that it looks to the past to inspire action for today. It has its place, it has its monuments, it has its political institutions, it has its political tradition. All those things make that distinct. And those are particular things, meaning that they can be different elsewhere. So you can have a British Christian nationalism, an American Christian nation, and they would be different. So much so that you can have someone like Charles Dickens show up and look around and despise Americans. So things can be different, right, in different places. And that's just as Christian as someplace else. And that's good. It's good. Because we are bounded creatures. We are creatures that are built to take on a second nature. So we have a first nature, which is fundamentally human. A lot, composed of principles and other things that are clearly good. And yet we are created to take on a second nature. We're created to take on that first language. We're created to take on those various forms of greetings and salutations and the manners that we just adopt, that we should do, that we know that we should do, and we do them. And if we don't do them, we say, oh, I should have done that. The almost like the normal state of when you go to your town fair or the state fair or these other things that you do in life, they seem so normal to you. They're second nature to you and seem right in themselves as a sort of prejudice, not bad prejudice, but in a way that they seem right to you because you've been socialized and brought into them from childhood, and that's your way of life. All that is good. Edmund Burke has a line, I can't quote it, but when he talks about prejudice, he says that prejudice, it gives you confidence in life. It basically gives you confidence to know what to do. You know the appropriate reaction to some event. So we know that when someone bumps into us, even if it's their fault, we both say you're sorry or I'm sorry. And that's because we know that it's a little jarring. Someone bumps into you. You can recognize that it wasn't, it was maybe a minor form of negligence, but not egregious. And you say, oh, I'm sorry. And he says, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, you smile and you move on. That's a way to deal with this situation of being kind of jarred out of the moment by someone bumping into you. So, my point is that's just a basic thing that we adopt. I mean, not only that, we actually teach our kids that. Kids say, well, kids will say, well, he bumped into me. It's like, well, but it's proper for you to just acknowledge it by saying, oh, I'm sorry. And then everyone did what they're supposed to do, and everyone goes on with life as if it didn't happen. What is that? That's a sort of prejudice that we've instilled in our children, that was instilled in us, that aids us. There's a social good in that. Other cultures don't have that, by the way. People bump into each other and say nothing, or they get mad at each other, Or they expect the other person to apologize, and they don't apologize, you get in a fight. Not everyone has that. Trust me. But we have that. And it's good. And that's the sort of thing you want to preserve because it's your own. It's distinctive, it's second nature, seems right. And if you inject people who don't have that second nature, it creates social uncertainty and you lack the confidence. Now you're on like eggshells of offending people because there's no common set of manners to relieve a certain awkward situation. You don't know what to do. But now, because of social custom, we can get through life. We can relate to people properly. We can work with people because we have a common set of social expectations. We can do it in confidence without every other moment thinking some guy's going to punch you in the nose for looking at him funny or not looking at him, but he thinks you're looking at him. Anyway, all right. I can keep going on and on about it. But yeah, so thank you for listening. And I guess, how much do I have left on this? Nope. Okay. Maybe there'll be a part 4, maybe not. We'll see. Anyway, but thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.